The name of the course is Oil, Gas, and Other Minerals Taxation. So just by looking at the name, or just by seeing the name, you realize that there's going to be some aspects. We have oil, gas, and then the other minerals. Okay, so the other minerals, it could be gold, diamond, bauxite. Then for the oil and gas, that one is oil and gas. But for a proper understanding, we will first deal with the oil and gas aspect. That's what we are going to look at, the oil and gas aspect. Then moving forward, after we look at mining, which will fall under other minerals. Okay, and basically oil and gas and mining, they are the same, just some slight differences in terms of taxation. And before we can even understand or delve into taxation, you need to understand the technicalities, or let me say, understand how the industry operates in terms of their operations before you can really, as a tax person, begin to assess these industries for the purposes of taxes or all other applicable taxes. So for oil and gas, what happens is that there are some materials beneath the earth's surface, okay? Be it please give me a minute. What's happening? Okay. Be it the offshore or onshore. Okay. So be it the land or the water bodies, there are some impurities beneath the earth's surface, and then they get decomposed. As they get decomposed, then the oil and gas begin to form. Basically, that is what happens. Now, the issue is how would the oil or the gas be able to come to the surface of the earth? So under the oil and gas sector, we have three main sectors under the oil and gas. We have the upstream sector, we have the midstream, and then we also have the downstream sectors. So the upstream sector is responsible for the pumping of the oil and gas from beneath the earth's surface to the surface of the earth. Basically, that is what the upstream sector is responsible for. So we can have Tullow, we can have ENI, ExxonMobil, those kind of multinationals. We also have some local upstream oil and gas companies in Ghana as well. Then the midstream will refine the oil and gas because it's in its raw state. So when the oil and gas is in its raw state, we call it the crude oil. So in the midstream sector, we can have TOR, that is the Tema Oil Refinery. Then the downstream sector would then sell the refined product. So here you realize that we have fuel, we have in terms of petrol, in terms of diesel, in terms of engine oil, those kind of end products from the refining of the oil and then the gas. And the downstream, we can have companies like Vivo, Gol, Total, Puma, and the likes. So basically, that is the three main sectors under the oil and gas sector. But for the purposes of the CIT professional paper, oil, gas, and other minerals taxation, our main focus is going to be on the upstream sector of Ghana. That is going to be our main focus. So now let's delve into what the upstream sector does. When we take a look at the upstream sector, what does it do? But basically, as I said earlier, they mostly are responsible for bringing the oil and gas to the surface of the earth because the oil and gas is found beneath the earth's surface. So with the upstream sector, here we can also link it to what goes into the exploitation of natural resources because the oil and gas is a natural resource. The gold is also a natural resources. So first of all, there would need to be the acquisition of the right or the license. So the acquisition of right or license. So when it comes to the various sectors in the oil and gas sector, the upstream sector is regulated by the Petroleum Commission of Ghana. Bear in mind that because it's a natural resource and it's of a high economic value, it's a highly regulated industry. All natural resource industries are highly regulated. And then also, according to the Constitution of Ghana, power is vested in the President of Ghana to manage these resources on behalf of the people of Ghana. So when it comes to the upstream sector, it's regulated by Petroleum Commission, but it's not regulated by GNPC, that is the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation. It previously used to be till when there was the establishment of the Petroleum Commission Act. So now Petroleum Commission is the regulator and GNPC is an operator. So when it comes to the upstream sector, there's a highly relevant documentation called the Petroleum Agreement. The Petroleum Agreement. So the Petroleum Agreement is an agreement between or amongst the parties to the oil and gas field. Let's also bear in mind that when it comes to the upstream sector, the parties involved in exploring the oil or exploring the oil and gas field for its commercial discovery mostly enter into a joint venture. So the joint venture is going to be a combination of several parties to a particular oil field. And for that matter, that is where the Petroleum Agreement will begin to display it here. But then because GNPC is a representative of the government of Ghana to every petroleum agreement, well, GNPC do not necessarily have to enter into a petroleum agreement before GNPC can undertake any oil and gas exploration activity in Ghana. However, all other companies or operators who need to enter into a petroleum agreement, of which GNPC will always be a party to that petroleum agreement. So it is the Petroleum Commission that is going to grant the license, but then several processes would need to be entered into. So whoever that is interested in a particular oil field, first of all, in one of these two ways, can just express an interest, put in an application, and then it will be assessed. Or there will be a competitive bidding.
Book. Mommy.
Or there will be a competitive bidding where interested parties will be called on, the blocks will be assigned. So whoever is interested, if they are able to meet the criteria. So with the acquisition of the right or the license, that is where, when everything is said and done, then the Petroleum Agreement would need to be drafted. When it's ratified by Parliament, then operations can begin to start. So after the acquisition of the license, then we enter into the exploration phase. At the exploration phase, that is where the operators would then begin to search for the oil. So they're actually searching whether the oil exists or not. And if it exists, that the oil and gas exist in commercial quantities. That is the main basis when it comes to the exploration phase, when you talk about commercial discovery. If there's no commercial discovery, ideally, it will not really make business sense to move on and then develop the oil and gas field to produce. So commercial discovery basically implies that the oil exists in commercial quantities such that the operators can make profits out of it. So at the exploration phase again, there's one important methodology that operators really use, that is seismic exploration methodology. So what happens is that either the exploration is happening on the land or the water bodies. There are certain equipment that is employed, be it the hydrophones or the geophones, It picks up sounds from beneath the earth's surface. Once it's able to be gathered, it gets interpreted, and then they will know whether there's oil, and even if there's oil, does it exist in commercial quantities? So which means that when it comes to the oil and gas sector, the interpretation of the data is very, very important. If there's a wrong interpretation, then whatever action they are going to take is also going to have a wrong implication, and it may even lead to a loss. Now, after the exploration phase, then we go into the evaluation phase. So the evaluation phase, as I said earlier, there will need to be the appraisal of the data, the assessment of the data, and if it leads to a commercial discovery, then they move to the development phase. So if there's no commercial discovery, it will not make business sense to move to the development phase. Please, let's take note of that. It's at the development phase where it actually requires the installation of machinery, equipment, expertise, you know, all those kind of technical capacities, because all those things will be assessed even at the acquisition of the license or the right phase. Now, you may come across a term called a reserve, or let's say technically or economically recoverable. So for an oil and gas field, let's say for us to say that, oh, it's recoverable, or there's an oil and gas reserve here, meaning that it actually means that the operators have the financial capacity, they have the technical capacity. And in fact, in terms of legislation, they are not restricted. They can be able to move on and then extract oil. Okay, so the fact that the oil and gas exists does not necessarily connote that it is recoverable. Please, let's also bear that in mind. Sometimes due to one or more constraints, even though the oil may exist in commercial quantities, they may not be able to extract the oil as at that point in time. So in oil and gas, we have a term called the reserve, to the extent that we can even have a proven reserve and then an unproven reserve. So a proven reserve basically connotes that indeed the oil and gas exist in commercial quantities, and then the operators have the financial technical capacities. When it comes to legislation as well, they are not restricted. They can move on, and then they can be able to extract the oil. But unproven, meaning that the oil and gas may exist in commercial quantities, but due to one or two reasons, they cannot be able to extract. So in this sector, we move from the unknown to the known. That is basically what I want to put across. At one point in time, it could be an unproven reserve. At another point in time, there could be a proven reserve. So the interpretation of data is very key when it comes to the upstream oil and gas sector. After the development phase, then we move to the production phase. So the production phase is more or less like the oil and gas field is set now, and then they can be able to produce. And the production can go on for a number of years. We also have the decommissioning phase. The decommissioning phase. So remember, it's an oil and gas field. Certain activities have been done on the field or even beneath the water bodies. Certain installations have been done. So in an instance where the oil and gas reserve is depleted, meaning that there is no more oil and gas on that field or in that field, then we'll need to decommission the field or the area, meaning that all the installations that have been done will need to be uninstalled. All the digging of the walls and all that will need to be sealed so that at least the field can come back to its normal state. That is the decommissioning phase. And for these purposes, a fund is set aside during the operations where the operators would begin to contribute into the decommissioning fund, such that when the oil and gas reserves are depleted, they tap into such a fund and then they decommission the site. The decommissioning fund has tax implications. So when we get into the tax bit, we'll begin to take a look at it. Now, we also have the relinquishment phase. The relinquishment phase doesn't necessarily mean it's the last phase, but depending on what happens, it could be the last phase. So over here, like I said, the oil and gas can be recovered or it can be discovered, but due to one or two constraints. So when those things happen, either be it legalities, legislation, or financial capacity or technical capacity, to the extent that looking at the circumstances, it will not really be okay to go on and extract the oil, then the license that has been acquired will need to be released back to the appropriate authority. So that's what we mean by relinquishment. When we talk of relinquishment, that is what we mean. Mr. Edwards, are you okay? Are you following? Let me put it like that.
Yes, I'm following. Can you come again on the relinquishment stage, the phase, the last one?
Okay, that's fine. So, I made mention of a concept called a reserve or an oil and gas reserve. We can have a proven reserve and then an unproven reserve. And when it comes to oil and gas sector, we move from the unknown to the known. So what happens is that when the data is gathered, it also gives an insight of what goes on beneath the earth's surface, either land or the water bodies. Now, sometimes when the data is gathered, it could mean that, yes, the oil and gas exists. In fact, it may even exist in commercial quantities, but the operators may not have the technical capacity to be able to extract the oil, either be it a human capital, that's an expertise, or a machinery capital. So when it happens like that, especially if all other options have been explored and at that point in time, they may not be able to extract the oil, it may make sense to release the license, because remember, they need to acquire the license before all these things will be undertaken. A license will be acquired before exploratory activity, development, production, before all these activities would be undertaken. So even before the drafting of the petroleum agreement, of course, there will be some estimates, all right. But in reality, you may get to the field and then there may be a vast difference as to the estimates. So it would mean that the license will need to be released back to the appropriate authority. So that action is what we call the relinquishment phase. So even with that, it mostly happens after the exploration phase. They will not need to move on to the development and no. They just, once it's at the exploration phase. So the exploration phase is very, very key, very, very important. Whatever goes in there, once the information is obtained, and at that point in time, it will not be okay to move to the development phase. Then they would have to release the license back to the appropriate authority. Please, are you okay with that?
Yes, please, I'm okay.
Okay. So once we've been able to understand the upstream sector bit, let me introduce distribution of crude oil. Distribution of crude oil. Remember, the petroleum operations is a joint venture operation. So obviously there could be 3 or 4 operators, of course, of which GNPC is always a party to the petroleum agreement. So the question is, as there are 3 or 4, how is it shared? Okay. And then again, when it's even shared, how is it priced? Let me put it that way. So when it comes to the pricing, let's take a look at the pricing. When it comes to the pricing, we have the benchmark plus pricing. the benchmark plus pricing. Okay, so not all crude oils are created equal. Not all crude oils are created equal. So in a particular jurisdiction or in a particular field, the crude oil may be different from the other crude oil, even though they're in the same jurisdiction. But then when it comes to pricing in the upstream sector of Ghana, remember I said we are focusing on the upstream sector. So when it comes to the upstream sector of Ghana, or even worldwide, there are about 160 traded oils on the commodity market, respectively in the oil and gas sector. And then again, we have 3 main primary traded oils. Okay, so we have the Brent crude, or the Brent blend. Then we have the WTI, which is the West Texas Intermediate. Then we have the OPEC. Now, investors or contractors mostly prefer the Brent blend and then the WTI. Okay, that is what investors mostly prefer, because they are sweet oil and then they are also lighter oils. So mostly the benchmark, it follows the Brent crude and then the WTI. So what happens is going to be the benchmark plus or minus differential. So if let's say the Brent crude is, let's say, $5 per barrel. So the operators can go like, okay, $5 plus or minus a relevant cost. So it could be in terms of a refining cost, in terms of a transportation cost, however, cost that is so relevant that they will need to capture it into the pricing. So basically, that is it about the pricing. Mr. Jude, when I was asking if there are questions, you didn't ask your question. This one, I'm going over it because of Mr. Edwards, and I'm sure there could be new people coming on board. That's how come I'm going over it. But all the same, I would chip in that. Okay, don't worry. So basically, that is it about the pricing. Now, when it comes to the distribution, in Ghana's case, just as Mr. Jude asked about fiscal regime, the fiscal regime for Ghana is royalty with state participation. Okay, that's what's going to inform the distribution of the crude oil. That's how come I just had to chip it in. So royalty with state participation. Now, the question is, what is a fiscal regime? The fiscal regime basically looks at how the cost and then the benefits associated with the oil and gas operations are shared. That is the fiscal regime. Then we also have the fiscal element. The fiscal element are the cost and then the benefits themselves. So worldwide, we have 3 main fiscal regimes. We can have the production sharing contract, the royalty regime, and then the service contract. So the production sharing contract looks at its fiscal element. We have the cost oil, and then we have the profit oil. I'm just giving a brief overview. So when you get into the videos, you get more explanation to it. So the profit oil and then the cost oil are the main dominant feature when it comes to production sharing contract. Again, with a production sharing contract, it is the government that has ownership to the oil and then the gas. Okay, so here there is a cost recovery component, which is called the cost oil. So after everything is said and done, then the contractor will be given a portion or a percentage that allows a cost recovery, and the remaining will be shared, which is the profit oil. And the profit oil that is assigned to the contractor is what is going to be taxed on. Now, when it comes to the royalty regime, its main dominant feature is the royalty. Even though for every fiscal regime, there may be an element from the other fiscal regime, but you always need to focus on the dominant fiscal regime. So for the royalty regime, it's mostly the payment of royalty or the levying of royalty. And then Here it is the contractor that has ownership to the oil and then the gas. When it comes to the service contract, it's mostly for countries or for host government where they are highly endowed with a natural resource, but they may not be the right expertise. They may not have that expertise to be able to explore the oil. So they bring in on board a contractor, and then that contractor will be able to provide such services, and then a fee is paid, and then that is it. Of course, taxes would also be paid in there. Then there's the fourth one. The fourth one is the hybrid. So it's a school of thought that goes like, okay, a particular jurisdiction may have a particular fiscal regime that has elements of all the other worldwide fiscal regimes. So if that is the case, then we'll need to have the hybrid. But bear in mind that no one fiscal regime is better than the other. In an examination condition where you are asked if the production sharing contract or production sharing agreement is better than the other, is better than, let's say, royalty regime, discuss. Okay, so you need to introduce it, talk about its features, advantages, disadvantages. Then you take a stand that no one fiscal regime is better than the other. It's purely dependent on the needs of the host government. Okay, so they will decide the particular regime they would want to exercise. Now, when it comes to Ghana's fiscal regime, it is the fiscal element that will determine the fiscal regime. So for Ghana's fiscal regime, there are so many fiscal elements, of which we'll be seeing some in the distribution of crude oil, and in fact, moving forward, we'll be seeing a lot of them. So in Ghana's fiscal regime, we have royalty, there's the levying of the royalty, which is levied on gross production. We have the carried interest. The carried interest entitles government to a share of the oil produced when government contribute towards only production cost. Okay, let me put it down. When government contributes to only production cost. Please take note of this because this has an impact on the computation of capital allowance. Then we also have the additional interest. The additional interest will entitle government to a share of the oil produced when government contributes to both production and development cost. I believe we know production and development by now. We also have the surface rental. I think last week we looked at the computation of it. So the space that the operators are operating in. So that is what they are going to be paying some form of rent. And depending on the phase that the contractors are in, either exploration, development, production phase, you'll be paid some charge. You'll be paying some charges in when it comes to the surface rental. We also have training allowance. It's a one-time payment. We also have technology allowance. It's also a one-time payment. But these go to GNPC, okay, because they are also doing some operations, so it goes to GNPC. Then we can have, hello, is someone asking a question? Hello? Please, if you are not asking a question, kindly mute yourself, okay? The class is being recorded. Okay, thank you. We also have the corporate tax, of course. Or we even have withholding taxes. There are so many types of tax over here. Even the royalty and the carried interest, they are all some form of taxes. So it's basically the same. We also have dividend. Dividend paid by the National Oil Company, which is GNPC. So these are some of the fiscal elements under Ghana's fiscal regime. It's highly regulated by government. And as for the royalty, it's always levied as long as there is production. So irrespective of whether they are making a profit or a loss, once there's production, the royalty is going to be levied. So let's look at the format of the distribution of crude oil. In Ghana's case, let me put it that way. Here we have gross production. So you have your gross production in value, then less the royalty. The royalty is always levied. So you have the royalty. We also have the sole risk premium. I think today we'll be looking at sole risk premium. So when we get there, I would elaborate more on that. So after that, if there's no sole risk premium, don't bother. That is fine. But for royalty, royalty is always levied on gross production. There could be an instance, an examination where you need to do a contribution of crude oil, but then you are not seeing royalty. So that means that you need to make an assumption. Okay, but be very sure that royalty is not explicitly indicated in the question. If it is not, and you know that you need royalty, then you need to assume. So the end result will give us the net production. Now, it is out of this net production that is going to be shared again amongst the contractors and government. But government's own comes in the form of the carried interest and then the additional interest. So the carried interest can also be called the participating interest or initial interest. The additional interest can also be called the additional carried interest, additional participating interest, additional paying interest. Even the carried interest can also be called the paying interest. So when you see these things, they are the same thing. So the net production is what's going to be shared amongst government and operators. So this is government share. Then for the other operators, depending on the proportionate sharing interest. So we may have contractor A, contractor B, contractor C. It could even be how many, as and when, it depends. So they will just be sharing and sharing and sharing. But I just want you to take note that it is this net production . It is this net production that is shared amongst government and the contractors. So you need to make sure that depending on the percentages that are given for the carried interest, initial interest, then the operators' percentages, they sum up to 100%. You need to make sure of that. Or if they are in ratio, they sum up to 1. Sometimes the carried interest and additional interest is in percentage, and sometimes the contractor shares are in ratios. So you need to know how to go about it. But always make sure it's 100% or up to 1. Or if they are in different units, you might as well share the carried interest and additional interest, deduct it from the net production, then the remaining share it among the contractors. So basically, that is it. I think with this, Mr. Edwards, you'll be fine on what we are coming to do today.
Okay.
Do you have any question, Mr. Edwards? Or you're okay?
I'm okay for now.
Interesting. Okay, that is fine. So now let's move on to today's lecture. Okay. So today we are going, this is not what we are going to be doing.
Madam Abigail,
Yeah.
Madam Abigail, I have a question. Please,
Okay.
are you saying that we'll have to, when we reach the net production, we take the net production as 100% to share among the government and the other operators?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
So what happens is that, I don't know, maybe along the line we'll see a question. So what happens is that you see they'll give carried interest like 5%, additional interest 10%. So it means when you add 10 plus 5, 15. So the remaining 85 will belong to the contractors. Okay, that is what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello, Abigail.
Yeah.
Please, is this lecture 2 or lecture 3? Or it doesn't matter, it's the topics?
I think this is lecture 3 because that's the inscription. I've divided them into sessions, but for every session, we are supposed to handle about 3 lecture sessions. Okay, so this one I was supposed to do it last week, but we didn't do it, so I'm continuing.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So we have stability agreement, unitization and operating agreement, and the sole risk operations, and then the farm in, and then the farm out agreement. So for this session, that is what we are going to be looking at. Okay. Remember, we have petroleum agreement. It's an agreement that stipulates the contractual relationships among the parties to the oil and gas field. Okay. Now, the petroleum agreement per the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, you know, the production field, it can go as long as 25 long years. Sometimes it can even be longer. Even the exploration phase can go as long as 7 years. When you get to read the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, you get to see all that I'm saying. So the question is, okay, a petroleum agreement was entered into, let's say, in the year 2010. And in the year 2024, there is an amendment to a specific tax provision that is applicable to the oil and gas sector. The question is, will that amendment apply to that petroleum agreement? This is where the stability provision comes to play. Okay, so the stability agreement is in every petroleum agreement. And it's a provision such that any subsequent laws, any subsequent legislation that is likely to have an adverse impact on the operators, okay, is not likely to suffice. Basically, that is what the stability agreement seeks to do. But then there are 2 main stability provisions or clauses. We have the freezing clause and we have the equilibrium clause. So the freezing clause, as the name implies, means that that provision has been frozen. If there are any subsequent laws, it would or it cannot be changed. That particular provision, the petroleum agreement, even though there's been an amendment, cannot be changed unless the parties enter into an agreement to change that provision. That is how come in the oil and gas and in the mining sector, the old laws are still in force. Okay. Then we also have the freezing clauses. No, sorry, the equilibrium clause. Now, the equilibrium clause, as the name implies, it makes room for some changes. So basically, the fiscal element, or let me say the tax element like royalty, carried interest, additional interest. So if, let's say, for instance, government say that, oh, the oil and gas industry is booming, so I'll give a maximum royalty rate of 10%. So henceforth, royalty should be paid at 10%. So remember, the petroleum agreement that was entered into in the year 2010, okay, is still in force. They are still producing. And in the petroleum agreement of that operation, let's say it's 5%. The royalty is 5%. So if now government is saying that the oil and gas industry is booming, so the royalty will levy it at a rate of 10%, what is going to happen to that operation or that agreement that was entered into in the year 2010? So here, it mostly gives room for equilibrium. The operators can agree that, okay, as for us, we are sticking to the 5%, or we will stick to the 10%. So it makes room for such a balance. But with the freezing clause, unless they enter into an agreement to change that provision to suit the specific amendment before the freezing clause can be changed. If not, they will still go with the old law. So basically, that is it about the stability. Mr. Jude, I'm sharing the screen, or you're not seeing anything. Please, do you see the screen?
Madam, please, are you writing on it?
I'm not writing, but do you see stability agreement, unitization, and all those stuff?
Yes, you're on the
Okay.
outline.
Yeah, I'm not writing. I'm just giving an overview. I'm not writing. If I have to write, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. So now we also have unitization and operating agreement. Okay. In the oil and gas sector, even in the mining sector, there are certain technical concepts, and we need to understand them before we look at the tax issues. So one of them we just looked at is the stability agreement. This basically, that's what it means. Then we have unitization and operating agreement. Now, I don't know if you've been following this case, ENI and Springfield, where the government of Ghana ordered such contractors to unitize. So the question is, what is unitization? What triggers unitization? So when it comes to the oil and gas sector, remember, we are dealing with a natural resource, and how the natural resource behaves, we are not in control of that. And we also looked at the characteristics of crude oil. So we've got to know that a crude oil can be viscous, it can be toxic, and then it can evaporate easily depending on its nature. Let me put it that way. So there could be an instance where, let me give an illustration over here. So we can have oil and gas deposits over here. This is for, let's say, contractors A, B, C. Then we can have another one here. Let's say D, E, F. Okay, so there are oil and gas deposits here. And there could be the nature of the earth over here, whether beneath the water bodies or the land. Now, there could be this oil and gas deposit here. Let's say this is even a reserve. And it can straddle. It can just be moving and be coming here. And maybe move and come here. Then it goes back. Then it begins to swim inside and then go. So it's just moving. So here we call it the oil and gas straddling from one place to the other, depending on the nature of the oil. That is what I want you to take note of. Now, every field is covered by a petroleum agreement. So A, B, and C, obviously, they have entered into a petroleum agreement with GNPC, who is the representative of the government of Ghana. D, E, F to the same. So because of that, whatever goes on with ABC is under the petroleum agreement. Here too is under the petroleum agreement. But at a point, at the exploration phase, they could tell that, okay, at a point here, let's say is 1 million barrel. At a point, we are getting about 800,000 barrel. So what is happening? So because the oil is moving from one place to the other, likewise, depending on the nature of the oil here, it can also move from one place to the other. So the oil and gas is straddling from one block of oil field to the other block. And this can actually breed competitive drilling. Okay, because at a point, I'm having 1 million, at a point is 800,000. What is happening? So what does it mean that the oil that is moving from here to here, it belongs to these contractors A, B, and C, or it belongs to contractors D, E, F? Please, I hope you are getting the concept. Are you with me? Hello?
Yes, we are with you.
You are getting
Yes,
it?
we're here. Yes.
Okay. So what happens is
Hello,
that,
madam.
yeah.
Madam, please, can you go back and explain that again? My internet got distracted. Thank you. No, just this part, the fact that you were explaining the utilization operation, then you went further to write the AB saying something, but I didn't get that part well.
Okay, that's fine. So I was given a scenario where the ABC over here, this is their oil block, and then the DEF, this is also their oil block. But due to the nature of the oil in ABC, some portion of the oil is moving about beneath the Earth's surface. Okay, so when it happens like that, at a point, after the gathering of the data, they maybe have like 1 million barrel, 800,000 barrel. So the question is, what is happening? Is it that the oil is reducing or what? No, because the oil is just moving about. Likewise, when it comes to the oil field for DNA, depending, it could be moving about. But this scenario, it can actually breed competitive drilling. Competitive drilling in the sense that at a point, the oil will have to be drilled. So if at a point it's reducing in quantity, it's increasing in quantity, this could say that this looks like my oil and gas deposit, the oil field is coming to this other oil field at a point. So what happens? That is what unitization is all about. This is what breeds unitization, and it can enforce competitive drilling, which is not really good for business. So it is best that they unitize. So the oil field under A, B, and C, and the oil field under D, E, F unitize. That is, they come together, pool their resources together, and then operate under one single license instead of operating under different licenses. Because remember, they are already having their own petroleum agreement. So that's one license, and then DEF, another license. But coming together, meaning that A, B, C, D, E, F will be operating under one license. And even with that, it depends. So the fact that they are unitizing does not mean that they are unitizing their whole area of operation. No. That is a very big no. They only unitize the place that breeds the oil strategy. Yes. Hello.
Okay, you were saying that, yeah, hello. So I wanted to ask a question about the illustration. With the various features of crude oil, I wanted to know the specific type that behaves in the manner you have described in that illustration up there.
Okay, when you look at viscosity, okay, so viscosity basically means heavy. An oil could be very, very heavy, or it could be very, very light. Light meaning that it can be moving from one place to the other as compared to heavy. Okay, and because it's also light, when it comes to evaporation, they can easily evaporate. But when it comes to a heavy oil, it will take a while before it can evaporate. So it depends on the nature of the oil. Please, are you okay with that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it is the area that breeds the oil straddling. That is what's going to be unitized. So that will breed unitization and operating agreement. Unitization and operating agreement. To the extent that you would even see unitized substance. The unitized substance are the oil and gas deposits that is captured under the unitized, under the unitization agreement. So this agreement is going to specify the area that is under the unitization. Look out for the oil and gas deposit, their quantum, because it's possible it is not the whole area that is having such a scenario. So here too, we are going to have a unit operator and then a technical operator. So the unit operator, amongst the parties, will begin to look out for the day-to-day operations. They handle the day-to-day operations. Then the technical operator will look out for the installation of machineries and application of expertise and all those kind of stuff. Then also we'll have a joint committee, because remember, there are several contractors coming on board, so there will need to be some negotiations and all that. Basically, that is it. But then we have several types of unitization. So bear in mind, under examination condition, when you are asked to write short note, this term, short note, I think last week we looked at the last sitting question. So please, those of us who haven't gotten the video, kindly take a look at it. Short note. This short note thing, like I said, it doesn't necessarily connote you are writing 1 or 2 lines. No, please. You are writing all the relevant facts on it. So if you are asked to write short notes on unitization, you need to include the several types of unitization. So we can have voluntary unitization. So that is where the contractors themselves willingly would agree that let's unitize. We pull our resources together and then we produce. Then later we redetermine the oil and gas. After that, we look at redetermination. Or we have the compulsory one. That one is what Ghana government ordered ENI and Springfield to do. So in the lecture session, or let me say in the lecture notes, you begin to see some links over there, but you can check it out, ENI and Springfield unitization in Ghana. Then we have the interstate unitization, or let me say cross-border unitization. So this happens between 2 jurisdictions. Okay, there could be 2 jurisdictions where the oil and gas is straddling between their borders. So it moves from this border at a point is this country, at a point is in the other country. Then we also have the intra-state unitization. So we can say that the ENI and Springfield is intrastate. Okay, it's intrastate because it's happening in one jurisdiction. Okay, so then we move on to sole risk operations. So the sole risk operations is mostly undertaken by GNPC. Remember, GNPC is the representative of the government of Ghana to every petroleum agreement, and they are the national they are the national oil company of Ghana. And then again, because of that, they are also operators, so they can, you know, do their own oil and gas exploration activity. So in an instance where they enter into a petroleum agreement with several other operators, and then let's say that GNPC would want to appraise a discovery, that is, we want to check whether there's a commercial discovery or not. And they do at their own risk, at their own expense, because they may not be a commercial discovery. And after there's a commercial discovery, and then the contractors, because there's a commercial discovery, they would want to partner with GNPC and then operate in such a field, which is very, very good. So what happens is that the cost that has been incurred by GNPC, the contractor, based on an agreement with GNPC, of which all these things will be provided for in the petroleum agreement, should in case that happen, would need to reimburse GNPC. Sometimes in petroleum agreement, you will see about 700% of the cost. So it's a reimbursable cost. That is what we call the sole risk premium, the sole risk premium. So in the distribution of the crude oil, remember I brought in, after royalty, I brought in the sole risk premium. That will have to be deducted. So it's basically GNPC undertaking single-handedly an appraisal activity And once it leads to a successful effort, the contractors would then come on board if they want to. And if they would want to, they will need to reimburse GNPC the cost that has been incurred. And that portion reimbursing is an agreement that would have to be agreed on, and they'll reimburse GNPC of such cost. Then we have the farm in and then the farm out agreement. So here is basically in an instance where there is an operator who is carrying out an operation and perhaps we need a helping hand, maybe in terms of financial capacity, in terms of technical capacity, or an acquisition of a skill, and there's another operator who can equally be able to deliver. So the one coming on board is a farm in, because the existing operator is operating under a proportionate sharing interest. Maybe that operator has 30% stake in the field. So if that operator is bringing on board another person and based on an agreement, the existing operator will want to give out, let's say 5% of it, because of the kind of support that the new operator is bringing on board. So it becomes a farm out to the existing operator and a farm in to the new operator, because the existing operator is in a way giving out some form of interest, losing something to be able to gain something. So basically that is it about the farm in and then the farm out agreement. Okay, so now let's delve into the lecture note. So with the stability of fiscal regime, as I said in the discussion, is a regime that makes room for stability. I mean, depending on the agreement. And it is a very relevant regime because it even helps government, because government knows that, okay, for this particular field, I know I'm getting royalty of 5%, carried interest of 10%, additional interest of. So even if there are some subsequent changes in the law, at least what is existing in the agreement, government is assured that they will be able to obtain that revenue. And it allows for planning by government as well. In our next lecture session, we'll begin to know how government is able to budget from the oil and gas revenue, such that they're able to fuse it into the budget. So that is what we begin to look at, the petroleum revenue management. Now we have the freezing clauses and then we have the equilibrium clause. Okay, so the freezing clause is to ensure that the fiscal terms remain unchanged for the duration of the contract. Once it's a freezing clause, it is frozen unless they enter into an agreement. So once it happens and they're able to agree that, okay, this particular provision can change, then it will begin to change. So the freezing clause freezes the legal regime on the day that the agreement was made and does not allow for any future legislative changes to apply to the investor or the operator. So they preserve at all times the respective rights and obligations of the contracting parties, particularly the investors, from any state action adverse to the terms of the applicable PA. The PA is the petroleum agreement. Let's look at the equilibrium clause. The equilibrium clause, they are those provisions which envisage a possible change in whole state law. So the equilibrium is more or less like provide a balance. It foresees a possible change. Okay, so it provides room for some adjustment. And this is mostly applicable to the fiscal provision. So something like the percentage in terms of royalty, carried interest, additional interest, additional oil entitlement. Now let's look at some stability provisions over here. When you take a look at Article 12.2 of MPA, MPA is a model petroleum agreement, and We looked at a sample last week. So here it says that contractors shall be subject to the following. B, income tax in accordance with the Petroleum Income Tax Law 1987. So back then, the PIT law was in session, okay, levied at the rate of then. So here, when a new tax rate comes into force, the operators or the contractors can have an option to apply the new one or still go by the old one. So Article 12.2 of the MPA is an equilibrium stability clause. Let's look at Article 12.11. This is that of the West Cape 3-point. It says that should the fiscal authority involved determine that the Petroleum Income Tax Law does not impose a credible tax, the parties agree to negotiate in good faith with a view to establishing a credible tax on the precondition that no adverse effect should occur to the economic right of GNPC. So here it's also protecting the interest of GNPC, that in an instance where there's a subsequent law, it should not have an adverse effect on GNPC. Okay, so this is more or less like an equilibrium clause, because they will need to take a look at it before they would indicate, they would want to agree whether they would want to go with the old law or the new law. So there are so many provisions that is in the Petroleum Agreement. Here we have the Ghana Cosmos Agreement, Article 26. All these stated there, once you begin to take a look at it, you begin to know that there's an equilibrium provision or a freezing provision. Okay, so now let's take a look at unitization and unit operating agreement. You can find this under Section 34 and 35 of the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act. Okay, all these acts, you can get them online. Okay, so here, like I said earlier, this unitization, it can either be triggered by the contractors themselves or the host government. It is best that should, in case the oil and gas begins to struggle among several blocks, of which those blocks are being operated on under several licenses, it is best they come together and then they put their resources together and then they operate. So it is an arrangement that allows the host government and contractors to come together and operate a unit area. So a unit area, because the area would need to be determined. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole area will need to be unitized. No, it needs to be determined. So that's how come we even have a term called unitized substance, meaning it's the oil and gas deposits that are found in the unitized area. So they operate a unit area where the oil and gas travel over many blocks, released to them in country to ensure maximum efficiency and benefit to all members. It is the process by which the oil and gas reserves of a reservoir, which do not sit within an area, that is the straddling, covered by a single license, are treated as a single unit for the purposes of development and production. So it also connotes that such an instance would be identified at the exploration phase. Remember, it's at the exploration phase that they are searching for the oil. So they begin to understand the nature of the oil, what goes on beneath the earth's surface. So they'll begin to know. So before even development and production continues, they will need to enter into a unitization agreement. Separate licenses of various contractors are thus merged into one single license with a single unit operator. I believe you know what the unit operator is, appointed to manage the development of the field at the unit operating agreement. Okay, so I've given several explanations to that. Now let's look at the unit agreement, and then the unit operating agreement. Okay, the unit agreement deals with the creation of the unit. Remember, it may not be necessarily the whole area that's supposed to be unitized. So for them to even begin to operate under the unitization agreement, there should be a unit agreement. The unit agreement would specify, or let me say, indicate the specific boundaries. Okay, the boundaries relating to that place. So it looks at the parties' interest, the cost, the production sharing, and then of course the appointment of the unit operator. Then the unit operating agreement basically looks at the daily operations in that area. So we have a unit agreement, and then we have a unit operating agreement. So when you take a look at, I think it's Ghana Cosmos, GNPC, and SABRE, there's a unitization operating agreement. So when you visit there, you can take a look at how a unitization agreement is. So we have the cross-border unitization. This mostly occurs between two different jurisdictions. So when the unitization happens in one jurisdiction, like that of ENI and Springfield, we call it intrastate unitization. So first of all, you need to take note that it can either be an intrastate or an interstate. And even whether it is intrastate or interstate, is it a compulsory unitization or a voluntary unitization? So the compulsory unitization basically means that it is the host government.
Please mute everyone.
So the compulsory unitization implies that it is the host government that will trigger the unitization, that look, you need to unitize. Okay, more or less like an order. But the compulsory unitization, it is the operators that will be willing to unitize. So first of all, it's either an intrastate or an interstate. Then it drills down to either a compulsory or a voluntary unitization. Okay, let's look at an illustration over here. And with this one, I will put it to the class how you are going to go about it. Like I said earlier, whenever you are solving a computation question, remember last week I made mention that for the professional paper, let me say specifically the oil and gas, or it may even cut across, we have three main types of questions. We have the application questions, we have the computation questions, and we have the theoretical question. So which means that as we are preparing for such a paper, you need to cut across all types of questions. You need to be able to understand the concept and ask yourselves likely questions that are to pop up, especially with the application questions. The application questions are questions that you will not find them in the textbook, okay? But you need to use your understanding to be able to answer. But the computation and theoretical, even computation question, you may not find it. You also need to apply your understanding. But one thing about oil and gas is with a theoretical question, if you don't know, you don't know, because it's a highly technical area. It's a highly specialized area. It's not all of us that are in the oil and gas or the mining sector. So I always entreat my students that we are also dealing with the laws. It's not only the tax laws, we are dealing with the oil and gas and then the mining laws. Like the oil and gas, we have the Petroleum Exploration Production Act. You need to take a look at it. Okay, so whenever you are reading the law, even with the petroleum agreement, you begin to see definitions. Kindly go through the definitions. Even with the laws, we have a section called interpretation. Always go through that so that at least you get familiarized with the concept. Okay, so for every computation question or even a discussion or a theoretical question, you may want to start with the requirement first. The main purpose of the exams, ideally, is to satisfy the examiner. It's not really for you to showcase what you know, because you may know something, but if you don't know how to present it, once you've not satisfied the examiner, you'll be marked down. So it's not really about what you know alone, but your ability to be able to present it. If you are not able to present it, let me say you are 60% down. Okay, so the presentation is very, very important. Someone may not be able to know everything, but the ability to be able to present it can earn that person more marks because of what he or she has presented about what he or she knows. Someone may know everything, but if you are not able to present it, then it doesn't also, make sense. So to every computation question, you may want to read the requirement, what the examiner wants from you, not what the question may demand, because the question may demand a lot of requirement, but there could be a specific requirement that is being demanded by the examiner, and that is what should be focused on. So when you read the requirement, it narrows down what the question may even demand of you. Okay, so read the requirement first before you read the main question. So as you are reading the question, because you have an understanding of the requirement, in fact, as you read the requirement, you even need to understand it. Reading and understanding things are different. Okay, so once you obtain an understanding and you begin to read the question and understand, you then begin to know what the examiner really, really wants. And you focus on only that and you move on. So here we are to compute the gross income of ABC Limited for 2018 year of assessment. Just by reading the requirement over here, we know that there is a party called ABC Limited. The year of assessment that we are supposed to look at is 2018. And then we need to take a look at the gross income. There's a further question: if there were costs, how will it be treated? Okay. So now let's read the main question. When we are done, then I'll solicit your views on how you would go about it. And please give me your views. It will let me know whether you are following the course or not. So ABC Limited has 40% and 30% interest in Coastal Reef Petroleum Agreement and Deep Sea Petroleum Agreement, respectively. The contract areas of the two petroleum agreements have been unitized for joint operation. It has been determined that the hydrocarbons, the oil and gas present in the unitized area, is in proportion of 40% and 60% for the Coastal Reef contract area and Deep Sea contract area, respectively. Gross production of crude oil in the unitized area in 2018 is 500 million barrels. The average price of crude oil that year is $50 per barrel. Required: compute the gross income of ABC Limited for 2018 year of assessment. Let me read the question again. ABC Limited has 40% and 30% interest in Coastal Reef Petroleum Agreement and Deep Sea Petroleum Agreement, respectively. The contract areas of the two petroleum agreements have been unitized for joint operation. So what this basically means that ABC is a party to the Coastal Reef Petroleum and then a party to the Deep Sea. But ABC has 40% stake in Coastal and 30% stake in Deep Sea. So which means the Coastal and Deep Sea are operating under two different licenses in two different blocks. So of course, there are other joint venture partners to these respective blocks. But then the illustration is specifically on ABC Limited. The contract areas of the two petroleum agreements have been unitized for joint operation. It has been determined that the hydrocarbon present in the unitized area. So I think I didn't mention redetermination in the brief overview. I just mention the name, but I didn't really go deep. Okay, so the redetermination is as a result, it mostly comes after unitization, because remember, the operators who are involved in the unitization are already operating under their own license. So if per the unit area that has been unitized, we need to really know the amount of hydrocarbon that is present in that unitized area. And that is where redetermination comes to play. So we need to redetermine the unitized substance in that unitized area. Okay, and we can use about two methods. It's either we look at the total oil and gas in place, or the oil in place. I believe you understand what I mean. We looked at it last week. And then, or we looked at, or we take a look at the recoverable oil in place, or the reserve in place. Basically, those are the two methods. So that's how come here is saying that it has been determined, meaning it has been redetermined. A redetermination has been done. That the hydrocarbon present in the unitized area is in proportion of 40% and 60% for the coastal reef contract area and deep sea contract area, respectively. Gross production of crude oil in the unitized area in 2018 is 500 million barrels. The average price of crude oil that year is $50 per barrel. Compute the gross income. Okay, so would anyone want to try how the gross income will be determined for ABC Limited? Or I should mention names. Mr. Edwards, are you there? I think you became my friend today, so today.
Yes, I'm there. In
Yeah.
fact, because of the you just touch on the redetermination, how it's supposed to be done. I was thinking that maybe we can go through this with us.
Oh, the redetermination is not really a big deal. I've just explained it. If you realized, I mostly explain the concept, and then once you do your reading, you'll be fine. So that's what I've explained. Is here. It has been determined, but remember they're operating on a single license. So it has been determined that per the unitization, now the hydrocarbon deposits, the hydrocarbon deposit in the coastal reef area is 40%, and then the deep sea is now 60%. So if you want to know ABC's portion in coastal reef and deep sea in the unitized area, how would you be able to determine it? That is what the question is asking. Or I should move on to another person.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Abigail, my namesake. Would you want to try?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so since there is a unitized area there, I'll find the proportion from the unitized, like the 500 million barrels they've produced. I'll find that of the CR and the deep sea. Then afterwards, I'll get the total for ABC in barrels. Then since the price has been determined there, in finding the total for ABC, I'll also use the proportion that ABC is holding in the CR and the deep sea to get it. And afterwards, I'll multiply by the price.
Perfect.
Please,
Exactly. Pardon?
Did you get me, please?
Oh, yes, you're on the right path. That's how it's supposed to be.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're on the right path. So basically, let me just break the question down. ABC, okay, let me put it this way. One contractor or an operator can be operating in several oil fields. Okay, so we have a term called separate petroleum operation or separate mineral operation. Separate in the sense that if one contractor is operating on several blocks, how would that person be assessed for tax purposes? So that person will be assessed for tax purposes separately per every block. Okay, so when we get there, we'll take a look at it. I'm just chipping it in so that when we
Madam,
get there, yeah.
when it comes to the blocks, are they given license per block, or like you are saying that one contractor can have several contracting areas? Are we going to do they get license for all the blocks, or it is one license that covers all the blocks?
Okay, so let me say every petroleum agreement would form one license. Let me put it that way. And depending, because if every petroleum agreement, the size of the block, okay, so the block that I'm saying is pertaining to every petroleum agreement. Every block or every area of the field is covered under one petroleum agreement. Okay, so that petroleum agreement will be covered. Please mute yourselves, okay, so that you don't disrupt the class, but it's a recorded class, so okay, I beg of you. And yeah, so the license, every petroleum agreement is covered by a license. Let me put it that way. So if that block is covered under a petroleum agreement, then it means that there's going to be one license. The one license doesn't mean that because they are all operators operating under one block, then they're all going to be having their license and all that. It just means that they have the license, but remember, it's a joint venture, so they are going to have their proportionate sharing interest. But one operator can have access to several blocks. And if that several blocks are covered under several agreements, then it means that there are going to be several licenses. Are you getting it? Pertaining to that block. Just that to every petroleum agreement, there could be 2 or more operators. So ABC like this will have a 40% stake in Coastal Reef Petroleum Agreement, which is covered under a license, but ABC has 40%. Likewise with the deep sea. Please, are you getting it? Hello, are you with me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So here, now that coastal and deep sea have been unitized, you realize that even with the unitization, there's 40% stake in coastal. That is the hydrocarbon, sorry, not the stake. Hydrocarbon deposit 40% in coastal and 60% in deep sea. So since Coastal Reef Petroleum Agreement is a joint venture, deep sea is also a joint venture. And these two agreements have been unitized. How would you be able to obtain ABC's proportion in the Coastal Reefs Agreement and in the deep sea? You need to trace it from the unitized area. Okay, so that is what Madam Abigail explained over here, but there's an illustration over here. So here we have the total production. The hydrocarbon deposit in coastal is 40, hydrocarbon in deep sea 60. But then ABC's interest in the coastal is 40, and its interest in deep sea is also 30. Okay, so if you really want to know deep sea's proportionate sharing in terms of value, you need to take a look at the hydrocarbon deposit that have been unitized in Coastal Reef, which is 40% of the 500 million barrel, and deep sea is 60% of the 500 million barrel. So which means that out of the 500 million barrel, 200 belongs to the Coastal Reef, and ABC has 40% stake in the Coastal Reef, which is the 200 million barrel. So you need to multiply the 40% by the 200 million barrel by the $50 per barrel, and then you'll be able to get the gross income. Likewise, the deep sea as well. Please, I hope you are getting it.
Yes.
Now, with respect to the cost, can someone tell me how the cost to be shared? Imagine there were costs, how will it be shared? Mr. Edwards, will you want to try? Hello? Okay, anyone else who want to try? Imagine there were costs, how will it be treated? Or I should mention names. Okay, let me see. Mr. Nkrumah, are you there?
Yes, madam.
Oh, now you are there, you not talk to me. Why? Hmm?
Are you asking whether how they are going to share or how it will be treated?
Well, honestly, it's the same thing.
The same thing, okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. It will be shared using the same proportion.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's how it's going to be treated or shared. In the same methodology like the gross income. Okay. So you see how we are sharing. That is the same concept we will be taking on when it gets to the computation of the taxes. So just take note of that. I think with a joint committee and need to operate, I've already mentioned those ones. So redetermination. Like I said earlier, the operators are already operating their own license. So, I mean, their own fields. So if an aspect has to be unitized, then it means that the hydrocarbon deposit in that place would need to be redetermined or reassessed. Okay, and there are methods. We have the stock tank oil originally in place, meaning that we'll just take a look at the oil in place over there, and then that is it. So if per the data that is gathered, it is 500 million barrels, then so be it. It's 500 million barrels. But that is oil in place. Oil in place. Okay, remember last week we looked at oil in place. Then we also have economically recoverable reserves. So, or they may want to take a look at the reserves that are in that oil or the unitized area, meaning it can be technologically or economically recoverable. Basically, those are the two main methods. Now let's look at sole risk operations. Sole risk operations, that is Article 9 of the Model Petroleum Agreement. Model Petroleum Agreement. So sometimes GNPC will want on its own, single-handedly, at its own cost risk, appraise a discovery. That is, look out for whether it exists in commercial quantities or not, even though there could be contractors to that field. So if the NPC want to single-handedly do that, that is fine. Sometimes the contractors may not be ready to be able to undertake, or the NPC will want to undertake such a discovery. But once it leads to a commercial discovery and the contractors would want to come on board, of which, of course, everyone will want to come on board when there's a commercial discovery, when it comes to oil and gas and then mining and all the other natural resources, then they will need to reimburse GNPC of the cost that has been incurred. When you take a look at the petroleum agreement, okay, you realize that, okay, let me see if I can show us. Okay, so this is a petroleum agreement. This is an actual, not a model. The model is more or less like a typology. It's a sample that all petroleum agreements follow. Okay, so this is also like a model. Article 9 is sole risk. So Article 9, page 31. Please, I hope you are following. Hello, are you following?
Yes, please.
Yes, madam.
Okay. I think it's 31. Yeah. This 36. Okay. 30, 31. Okay, so this Article 9. So let's look at Article 9, subsection 1 and subsection 2. Okay, let's read it and see how it is. So unless and until contractor has notified GNPC that it wishes to appraise the discovery, GNPC may notify the contractor that it will at its sole risk commence to appraise that discovery, provided that within 30 days of such notification from GNPC, contractor may elect to commence to appraise that discovery within its work program. Then subsection 2, when an appraisal undertaken under article subsection, article 9.1 at the sole risk of GNPC results in a determination that a discovery is commercial, contractor may develop the commercial discovery upon reimbursement to GNPC of all expenses incurred in undertaking the appraisal and arranging with GNPC satisfactory terms for the payment of a premium equivalent to 500% of such expenses. So this is what is called the sole risk premium. Now it says that such premium shall not be reckoned as cost of petroleum operations for the purpose of the accounting guide. So it shall not be reckoned as cost of petroleum operations. Okay, so which means that as tax persons, when you go there and it's being accounted for as part of the cost, you will need to disallow it. In the event that contractor declines to develop said discovery, contractor shall relinquish the development and production area established by the appraisal program conducted by GNPC. Okay. Madam Abigail, your hands were raised.
Yes, please. I have a question on the percentage for reimbursement. Is it not a cheat? Because if say you've had the risk or the cost to be 100 cedis and you want to take like 500% or 700%, is it not robbery?
Interesting. Well, let's just say that, you know, we have something called opportunity cost. Sometimes the opportunity cost of doing something, even though in literal terms, the cost involved is lower, but the opportunity cost is higher. Because if when GNPC decided to undertake an appraisal and there was no commercial discovery, then that is it. The contractor will not need to move on to develop the place. But GNPC, if GNPC would want to and undertake that action, it's not necessarily the reimbursement of the expenses, fine, it's part of it. But taking that risk, that is what is leading to such a higher percentage, because it could have been no commercial discovery and no one would reimburse GNPC. Okay. And this one, when it comes to business terms, is applicable. Sometimes whatever activity or whatever transaction that is being undertaken may be literal. It's not really a big deal, but due to what is involved, that is what would lead to the quantification of whatever service or whatever product that is being priced to whoever is receiving that service or that product. So we can take a look at it from that point of view. Please, are you okay with that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we are done with soil risk. Now we look at farm out and farm in. So the farm out and farm in, always take a look at it from the 2 points of view. Otherwise, you may get a bit confused. Obviously, one is going to come in and one is going to lose an interest. So whoever is coming in is a farm in to that person. Whoever is losing an interest is a farm out to the other person. And the reasons, there could be numerous reasons, either to obtain a financial support or a technical expertise, or sometimes to share risk. You know, risk sharing is very, very important when it comes to business. Okay, sometimes you need to share the risk. Likewise, when the benefit comes to you, you need to share it as well. So these are some of the reasons why there would be farm in and farm out agreement when it comes to the oil and gas sector. And when it comes to technical expertise, it could be maybe drilling issues or machinery issues or a human expertise issue. And when it comes to financial, to that one, the oil and gas sector is a highly financial dominated sector. Let me put it that way. It requires a lot of finance. So one may also want to share that as well. So depending on the agreement, we can have the farm in and we can have the farm out agreement. Now, kindly, please make sure that before you enter the examination hall, you read on these regulators and institutions and players and regulatory bodies. When it comes to GNPC, there's an act on GNPC, there's an act on Petroleum Commission, there's an act on National Petroleum Authority. Make sure that I'll try my best and collate all of them and share it with you guys. But make sure you read, especially on the objectives, rights and obligations, composition, functions, right to the point of GRA, Bank of Ghana, Investment Advisory Committee. Please make sure you read on all of them before you enter into the examination hall. It's a reading area, so I don't even treat it in class. Okay, I just make my students aware that you read it, then you should be fine. Then there are also terminologies. Like I said, whenever you meet an act, a law, an agreement, make sure you read the terminologies, okay, so that you can be abreast with the field. So basically, that is the end of this particular session. Please, do we have any question?
Hello. Madam Abigail.
Yeah.
So the question we saw on the redetermination one, I think the redetermined percentage was determined in the question already. So I assume you're supposed to determine that yourself. How do you go by it?
Oh, that one is mean that we are going to technical.
Okay. So that
yeah,
we'll do that one later.
For our purpose, we are tax people, so
Okay.
it
So
will definitely be given. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But the thing is, should in case it's not given. Okay, let me show you this question.
Okay.
I think I need to show you this question so that I don't know if I opened it. Oh, I didn't open it. Okay, good. I opened it. You see, when it comes to unitization and redetermination, okay. Over the years, I think it's once that there is a computation question, it's always a theoretical question. And this is an August 2022 paper.
Okay.
So with what you just asked, it just brought my mind to it that, okay, let us take a look at this question. At least, even if we don't solve it, we need to discuss it so that you get to know how it looks like. But should in case, as you are saying, you go to an examination hall and you realize that you would need the redetermination, and I'm sure the examiner will give you some lines for you to be able to get the redetermination percentages or however. Okay, for that one. But ideally, that is too technical. but who knows, anything can happen. So let's just take a look at this question. Let's look at the requirement first. Thank you for bringing my mind to that though. So here we have A. I hope I'm still recording. Okay.
Yes, it's recording.
Okay. So A, we have compute the surface rental charges payable in respect of the two fields for the 2021 production year. Compute the surface rental charges. And as you read the requirement of the question, take note of certain keywords. Okay. That's one thing about oil and gas, especially computation. You can overlook one keyword and your methodology could be right, but your answer could be wrong. And the papers are marked such that we mark in terms of methodology and answers as well. So your methodology, yes, you get a mark, but the answer will be wrong. So the A says that compute the surface rental charges payable in respect of the two fields for the 2021 production year. And you know that when it comes to surface rental charges, you can be charged right from the exploration to the production phase. Sure. But here the requirement is production year. So you only focus on the production year. Okay, mostly, I don't know, when students read this requirement, they begin to tell me we need to look at exploration and development phase. No, it's production year. Okay, so you don't waste your time. It's a 3-hour paper for 5 packed questions. So you need to know what you are doing so that you can make it. Now, B, ascertain the petroleum expenditure for the unitized operations. Petroleum expenditure for the unitized operations. For petroleum expenditure, like I said, we are focusing on the upstream sector. So you need to take a look right from the acquisition to the production phases, or whatever costs that are incurred in producing the oil. C, compute the accessible income of TC Exploration and Production Limited for the 2021 year of assessment. So here, the key word is accessible income of TC Exploration and 2021 year of assessment. So the question is, what is an accessible income? Here, students were talking about chargeable income, you know, they I don't know, but anyway, when we talk of accessible income per the Income Tax Act 2015 Act 89, basically they are all the incomes from employment, business, and investment. So since we are looking at an entity, then we are going to focus on business and investment because they may invest, you may never know. It doesn't look at any tax issues over here, any capital allowance issue over here. Accessible income is accessible income. Let me say the profit before tax in terms of tax is accessible income. I'm not talking about the profit before tax in terms of how do you call it? In terms of accounting, in terms of tax, when the capital allowance and all the deductibility issues have not been catered for. Okay, I'm saying it because in the question, there are some pop-ups in there. That's how come I'm saying read the requirement before you go to the main question, so that you don't waste your time. It's a 3-hour with 5 packed questions, so you need to know what you are doing. D, prepare the statement of distribution for 2021. So you realize that in all the requirement, the examiner is indicating the year 2021, 2021. The fact that the examiner is indicating the year 2021 doesn't mean that if you need to get a certain value from, a certain value before 2021, you don't need to compute it. You may have to compute it before you get to the 2021 value, but the focus is on 2021. So now let's look at the question. And this is a unitization question. Like I said, this is actually the first time there's a computation question on unitization. So TC Petroleum Limited and Ajekum Exploration and Production Limited, who are joint partners, have 40% and 45% interest respectively in West Cape 3 Points oil field. Similarly, Anu Energy Limited, Pra Oil Limited, and TC Petroleum Limited also have 25%, 30%, and 30% interest in offshore Cape 3 Point. West Cape 3 Point and offshore Cape 3 Point are adjoining oil fields in Ghana, which straddle into each other. So just by looking at the preamble, there are about 3 operators to every field. And the examiner is saying that these 2 fields are unitized. And in every field, you realize that there is one particular operator that is appearing. That is the TC Petroleum Limited, having an interest in the West Cape 3 Point and also having an interest in the offshore Cape 3 Point. Please, I hope you are following.
You are following?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now let's move on to the next one. Consequently, the 2 oil fields have been unitized for joint operation in accordance with Section 34 of the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, which is just what we looked at. Now let's look at the fiscal terms. Okay. So the fiscal terms of the agreement between the joint venture partners and the government of Ghana include. So I want us to do just a quick computation over here. Remember, I said that in the distribution of the crude oil, when you are sharing, that's the net production, when you are sharing amongst government, that is represented by the carried interest and then the additional interest and then the other proportionate sharing interest for the contractor. You need to make sure it sums up to 100% or 1, depending on the unit. If it does not sum up to 100% or 1, then you need to do some ratio and some proportions over here. So that means that, let's say, if carried interest, additional interest, and all the other proportionate sharing interest of the contractor, let's say when you add up, they're in percentages, and then when you add up, and it sums up to 90. When you are apportioning the net production, let's say for carried interest, let's say it's 5%, you may want to do 5/90 by the net production value. So you sum it up, that becomes the common denominator. You pick the respective interest, that will become the respective numerators. So 5/90 by the net production value. If it's carried, additional interest, and let's say it's 10%, then it will be 10/90 by the net production. If, let's say, contractor A is, let's say, 20%, then it will be 20/90. So that's what I mean by the apportionment. Here, it includes royalty payable at the rate of 10%, free carried interest of 10%, and additional participating interest of 5%. So we know that it is after we have deducted royalty and sole risk premium that we obtain the net production. So now let's see. The carried interest is 10 and the additional interest is what, 5%. So the 2 gives us 15%. Then let's come to West Cape 3 Point. TC has 40% and Ajekum has 45. So 40 plus 45 is giving us what? 85%. 85 plus 15 will give us 100%. Please, are you getting what I'm trying to arrive at?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now let's look at the offshore Cape 3 Point. The offshore Cape 3 Point, 25 plus 30 gives us 55. 55 plus 30 gives us 85. So 85 plus carried interest of 10 and additional of 5, it gives us what? 100%. So that is what I'm trying to communicate to us all. Now let's look at the redetermination. Redetermination outcome suggests that the hydrocarbon present in the unitized area is in the proportion of 40% and 60% for the West Cape 3 Point and offshore Cape 3 Point oil fields, respectively. So you realize that if you really want to know the quantum or even the value of the oil assigned to each operator, looking at the scenario we just did under unitization, you can easily be able to do it over here. So here, gross production of crude oil in the unitized area in 2021 year is 700 million barrels. So it has given the gross production, just like how the 500 million barrel was given in that scenario question. The average price of crude oil that year is $100 per barrel. The total area covered by each field, So this is a key word. Each field is 1,127 square kilometers each. Then these are the relevant information. So we have exploration cost, development cost, acquisition, utilization agreement, and related documentation, average cost per barrel. We are even seeing capital allowance, then corporate income tax, surface rent chargeable. So you see this list. Capital allowance and corporate income tax, honestly, is not needed for the requirement. But the examiner brought it. The examiner, per the requirement C, is asking for accessible income. Accessible income, you do not need to compute chargeable income. I mean, you do not need to compute capital allowance. But if you don't take a student to be computing capital allowance, and because they have seen corporate income tax, and after that, they will even compute the corporate tax. Okay, I know we are yet to do capital allowance. Yeah, I think we are yet to do that. So when we get there, you understand what I'm saying. But for surface rental charges, we have done that. So here, again, the examiner did not only give the surface rental charge for production. The examiner gave the surface rental charge for exploration, development, and production. Meanwhile, in the requirement, the examiner is asking for the 2021 production year. So if you don't take care, you may be tempted to compute the surface rental charges for all the phases. I don't know why sometimes students do that, but anyway. So you just focus on only the $100, but it's in respect of the two fields. So we know that surface rental charges, you need to know the area size. You need to know the chargeable per the phase. So here the area size, because we are dealing with two fields, so it's going to be for West Cape 3 Point and offshore Cape 3 Point, 1,127 square kilometers per each. Now, the question is, how many years for the production? Okay, we need to know. But the examiner is asking for the 2021 production year, which means that it's only 1 year. So for the offshore Cape 3 Point, it's going to be the $100 by the 1,127 square kilometer by 1. Likewise, the West Cape 3 Point oil fields. Please, I hope we are okay.
Yes, please.